2:15 in the afternoon. Near the Port of Jask, Iran. The Khordad-15 surface-to-air missile battery was already humming with high-voltage power. Its phased array radar turned toward the Gulf of Oman, scanning the horizon for a ghost. This was not another drill. For the first time in 3 years, the engagement light on the commander's console was flashing a steady, rhythmic crimson. The question was no longer if the battery could hit the target. The question was why the man in charge had already decided to wait. The air inside the concrete bunker was thick with the smell of ozone and recycled cooling fluid. Outside, the Iranian coastline was a jagged line of salt and sun-bleached rock. High above, the sky was a perfect, uncaring blue. The target was an American RC-135 Rivet Joint. It was flying a standard reconnaissance track 60 miles offshore. On a normal day, the Iranian crew would simply watch it pass and record its signal. Today, the orders from Tehran were different. Inside the cabin of the American aircraft, the atmosphere was deceptive. Technicians sat before glowing screens. They monitored electronic signals from across the water. The flight crew used the call sign Raven 11. They were professionals. They were used to being watched. They did not yet know that a fire control radar was beginning to calculate their exact position in three-dimensional space. Major Arash sat in the center of the darkened Iranian bunker. He was 42 years old. He had spent half his life preparing for this specific moment. A digital notification appeared on his primary display. It was a flash message from Central Command. It was marked with the highest priority. It contained a 16-digit authentication string. The major looked at the screen. The order was clear. The American aircraft had allegedly crossed the maritime boundary. It was now classified as a hostile intruder. Under the current rules of engagement, Arash had the authority to fire. In fact, he was being commanded to fire. His radar operators were calling out data points. Target is at bearing 180. Altitude is 32,000 feet. Velocity is 450 knots. We have a solid track. The Syad-3 missiles sat in their vertical canisters outside. Each one was a 10-meter cylinder of solid fuel and high explosives. They were designed to destroy targets at long range with surgical precision. Arash reached for the keyboard. His fingers hovered over the keys. The tactical situation was shifting. The American plane was beginning a slow, banking turn. To the automated systems of the Khordad-15, this looked like an evasive maneuver. To a human eye, it looked like a routine course correction. Arash felt the weight of the red envelope order in his mind. If he followed the instruction, the world would change in 6 seconds. He began to type 17 Delta 9. The characters appeared on the screen in bright green text. His executive officer watched him with intense focus. The rest of the crew held their breath. The only sound was the whirring of the cooling fans and the steady beep of the radar. Major Arash finished the sequence. The computer accepted the code. A final prompt appeared on the center console. It asked for a single confirmation. The system was now slave to his thumb. He had the valid order. He had the target. He had the means. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:18 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. Inside the cabin of the American RC-135 Rivet Joint, the environment was a controlled hum of electronics and low-voiced coordination. The aircraft was a massive, 4-engine intelligence platform. It was packed with rows of workstations and specialized sensors. For the crew of Raven 11, the mission had been routine for the last 6 hours. They were flying a standard orbital pattern in international airspace. One of the electronic warfare officers leaned forward. His name was Captain Miller. He stared at a waterfall display. On his primary monitor, a thin, bright line had just appeared. It was pulsing with a specific frequency. Miller spoke into his headset. "Flight, Raven 11. We have a new emitter." The pilot responded immediately. "Go ahead, Raven. I am seeing a high-intensity signal from the coast, specifically the Jask sector. Signature matches a Khordad-15 phased array radar." The atmosphere in the cabin changed instantly. A Khordad-15 was a high-end Iranian surface-to-air missile system. It was capable of tracking multiple targets at long ranges. On most days, these systems operated in a passive mode. They would scan the sky, but they would not lock on. This signal was different. It was a dedicated fire control track. Miller continued his report. The emitter is in high pulse repetition frequency. They are not just looking at us. They are ranging us. We are being spiked. The pilot adjusted his controls. Confirm. We are in international air. Are we clear of the boundary? The navigator checked the digital map. We are 62 miles from the baseline. We are well within the international corridor. The back-end crew of the Rivet Joint began to record the data. This was their job. They were there to gather intelligence on the very systems that were currently targeting them, but the intensity of the lock was rising. Usually, a radar spike lasted a few seconds as a warning, or a digital gesture of defiance. This one had been active for nearly 2 minutes. 30 miles away, inside the Iranian bunker, the atmosphere was a mirror image of the tension. The radar operator looked at Major Arash. The Major was still sitting. His hand was near the launch button. He had not moved since the system confirmed the engagement code. The operator spoke. Major, the target is maintaining its course. It is not turning away. The executive officer leaned in. They do not think we will do it. They think this is another game of nerves. He pointed at the countdown clock on the wall. The window for the intercept is closing. If we wait another 90 seconds, the lead angle will be too steep for the Syed 3 missiles. Arash did not answer. He watched the green dot on the screen. It represented over 30 human lives. The American aircraft was a converted airliner. It was slow. It was defenseless. If he pressed the button, the missile would reach its destination in less than 1 minute. Back on the Rivet Joint, Captain Miller saw the signal shift again. The pitch of the audio warning in his ears became a steady, piercing tone. Miller spoke with a controlled urgency. Flight, Raven. The signal has transitioned. We are now seeing a missile guidance uplink. They are in the final stage of the launch sequence. The pilot did not hesitate. Control. Raven 1-1. We are being targeted by a surface-to-air battery. Declaring an emergency. We are initiating defensive maneuvers and heading south. The heavy aircraft began to roll. It was not a fighter jet. It moved with the slow, agonizing weight of a whale trying to outrun a shark. Every person on board felt the gravity pull against their seats. They knew the physics. If a missile was already in the air, they could not outrun it. The pilot keyed his radio again. Any friendly assets in the area? This is Raven 1-1. We are under active targeting. 200 miles away, on the deck of an aircraft carrier, the response was already in motion, but they were too far. The only person who could stop the sequence was the man in the bunker who had stopped moving. The radar screen in the bunker flashed. A new warning appeared. The target was maneuvering. To the Iranian system, this was the final confirmation of hostile intent. The executive officer shouted, "Major, fire." Arash looked at the button. His thumb twitched. 2:21 in the afternoon. The Jask Peninsula and the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The vibration in the Iranian bunker was not from the equipment. It was the low-frequency rumble of a secondary power generator kicking in to support the radar at maximum output. The air was getting warmer. Major Arash remained motionless in his chair. His hand was steady on the edge of the desk. His eyes were fixed on the tactical display. The green dot representing the American aircraft was now flashing yellow. The system had automatically classified it as a target of interest following the entry of the launch code. A voice crackled over the secure landline from the regional command center in Shiraz. The speaker was a colonel. His voice was distorted by encryption. Battery 2. This is Sector Command. Report status. Our sensors show a full target lock. Why is there no launch indication? Arash did not reach for the phone. His executive officer, Captain Reza, grabbed the handset instead. Reza was younger. His face was flushed with the adrenaline of the moment. He spoke quickly. Sector Command. This is Battery 2. We have a valid track. The commander has entered the authorization code. We are waiting for final target stabilization. The colonel's voice hardened. "The target is turning. Do not allow it to escape. You have a direct order from the general staff. Engage the intruder immediately. Confirm." Reza looked at Arash. The major did not acknowledge him. He was watching the altitude readout for the American plane. 32,000 feet, 31,000. The pilot was diving to gain airspeed, 500 miles to the south, inside the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar. The situation had shifted from observation to crisis. A wall of monitors displayed the electronic order of battle. A large red circle pulsed over the Jask Peninsula. It was the lethal range of the Khordad-15 battery. The American RC-135 was deep inside it. The senior air defense officer spoke into his headset. "Magic, this is Kingpin. Confirm the status of the cap." The controller for the E-3 Sentry airborne warning aircraft responded instantly. "Kingpin, Magic. We have 2 F-35 fighters, call signs Viper 1-1 and Viper 1-2. They are currently 5 minutes out from the coast. We are clearing them for supersonic transit." On the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the roar of jet engines drowned out all other sound. 2 more F-18 Super Hornets were being hooked into the catapults. The crews worked with practiced, mechanical speed. The rules of engagement were clear. If the RC-135 was fired upon, the F-35s, already in the air, were authorized to neutralize the Iranian battery. In the cockpit of the lead F-35, the pilot adjusted his oxygen mask. His helmet-mounted display projected a world of glowing symbols over the real horizon. He saw the RC-135 as a friendly blue icon. He saw the Iranian radar as a red diamond. He was already selecting his precision-guided munitions. Inside the Iranian bunker, the tension reached a breaking point. Captain Reza slammed the phone down. He stepped toward Arash. "Major, they are demanding a response. If you do not fire, they will consider this a failure of duty. The Americans are bringing in fighters. We can see the signatures on the long-range scan. They are coming for us." Arash finally turned his head. He looked at Reza. His voice was quiet and flat. "They are coming because we spiked their plane. If we stop, they stop. We cannot stop," Reza whispered. "The code is in the machine. Tehran is watching." A new sound filled the room. It was a high-pitched, warbling alarm. It was the battery's own electronic support system. It had detected the incoming F-35s. The hunters were now being hunted. The morning was over. The afternoon was becoming a countdown. 2:24 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. The pilot of Raven 1-1 pushed the throttles of the RC-135 to their mechanical limit. The massive aircraft was vibrating with an unnatural frequency. It was not designed for aggressive maneuvering. The airframe groaned under the stress of a 4G turn. In the back of the plane, technicians gripped their armrests. Their screens were a chaotic blur of electronic interference. The radar warning receiver was no longer chirping. It was a steady, high-pitched scream. It was the sound of a missile system that was ready to kill. 60 miles to the west, 2 F-35 fighters accelerated through the sound barrier. Their call signs were Viper 1-1 and Viper 1-2. The lead pilot watched his helmet-mounted display. A red diamond was centered on the Iranian coastline. It was the exact location of the Khordad-15 battery. He could see the heat signature of the radar cooling systems on his infrared camera. The pilot keyed his secure radio. "Kingpin. Viper 1-1. I am 60 miles out. I have a solid track on the SAM site. Requesting clarification on the rules of engagement. If they launch on Raven, am I cleared for immediate suppression?" The response from the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar was crisp. "Viper 1-1. Kingpin. You are cleared to engage only if a launch is confirmed. You must have a missile in the air. Do not fire first. We are not looking for a war today. Do you copy?" Viper 1-1 copies. Holding for launch indication. The F-35 pilot shifted his focus. He armed his high-speed anti-radiation missiles. He was ready to destroy the Iranian battery. The moment its radar guided a weapon toward the American reconnaissance plane, he was a professional. He felt no hatred. He only felt the cold logic of the engagement. Inside the Iranian bunker, the temperature continued to rise. 2:25 in the afternoon. The cooling system was struggling to keep up with the heat generated by the phased array radar. Captain Reza was now standing directly behind Major Arash. He was breathing heavily. His hand was resting on the back of the Major's chair. "Major," Reza whispered. "The American fighters are closing. They are traveling at Mach 1.2. They will be in range to fire their own missiles in less than 3 minutes. If we do not fire the Sayyad 3 now, we will be dead before the order is completed." Arash did not look back. He was staring at the altitude readout of the RC-135. The plane was now at 20,000 feet. It was still diving. It was trying to get below the effective horizon of his radar, but his system was too advanced. The lock was perfect. "They are trying to survive," Arash said. His voice was surprisingly calm. "They are intruders," Reza countered. "The order is valid. The code is entered. Press the button, Major, for the sake of the battery. If you do not fire, you are sentencing us all to death when those fighters reach the coast." The Major looked at his console. A yellow light began to blink. It was a system health warning. The radar was being pushed too hard. It was a machine. It did not care about politics. It only cared about its own limits. Arash reached out. He placed his thumb on the final confirmation button. It was a square, plastic switch. It felt small. It felt insignificant. If he pressed it, the solid fuel motors of 4 missiles would ignite. The shock wave would shatter the windows of the nearby observation post. The radio in the bunker erupted again. It was the colonel from Sector Command. "Battery 2. You are in violation of a direct order. Fire now. Fire now, or you will be relieved." Arash felt the sweat running down his neck. He looked at the screen. He looked at the button. He did not press it. He did not move. The clock on the wall clicked forward. The silence in the bunker became louder than the alarms. 2:26 in the afternoon. The Jask Peninsula. Inside the Khordad-15 battery, the computer system reached its final state of readiness. A series of internal checks began. They were automated and invisible. High-pressure cooling gas flowed into the seeker heads of the 4 Sayyad 3 missiles. Thermal batteries ignited within the airframes. The missiles were now alive. They were no longer static objects of metal and fuel. They were active predators. They were waiting for a single electrical pulse to leave their canisters. Major Arash watched the sequence on his auxiliary screen. The words, "Ready to fire," pulsed in Farsi. The system was now slave to his right thumb. The engagement logic had calculated the intercept point. It was 34 miles offshore. At 32,000 feet, the probability of a kill was listed at 98%. Captain Reza moved closer. His voice was a harsh whisper. "The thermal batteries are only good for 5 minutes. If we do not launch now, the seekers will overheat. We will lose the missiles." Arash did not blink. "I am aware of the technical constraints." The radio from Shiraz was no longer speaking. It was screaming. "Battery 2. Confirm launch. Confirm launch now. We have radar indications of American fighters entering the engagement zone. Protect your position. Fire." Arash looked at the radar operator. The man was young. His hands were shaking on the joystick. He looked back at his commander with eyes full of terror. He was not a strategist. He was a 19-year-old conscript. He knew that if the Major pressed the button, the Americans would retaliate. He knew the bunker was the first target on their list. 10 miles away, the RC-135 Rivet Joint was banking into a hard turn. The pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, fought the controls. Henderson spoke over the internal circuit. "Crew, this is flight. We are at the edge of the envelope. Prepare for impact." In the back of the plane, Captain Miller watched the uplink signal. It was steady. It was unwavering. "The radar is still painting us. It is a perfect track. They have the handshake. They are just waiting for the trigger." The air in the Rivet Joint was cold, but Miller was sweating. He checked his survival vest. He looked at the emergency exit. He knew the Sayyad 3 carried a large warhead. It was designed to shred heavy aircraft with thousands of tungsten fragments. There would be no time for a parachute. Above them, at 45,000 feet, The two F-35 fighters were in a predatory orbit. The lead pilot, call sign Viper 1-1, checked his weapons status. Kingpin, Viper 1-1. I have a continuous track on the emitter. My sensors show the battery is in a pre-launch state. Thermal signatures are peaking. They are going to fire. The controller in Qatar responded. Viper, Kingpin, stand by. We are attempting to reach the Iranian Regional Command via the deconfliction line. Hold your fire. Repeat. Do not engage unless a missile is in the air. Viper 1-1 copies. But I am telling you, they are about to pull the trigger. Inside the bunker, Arash felt the plastic of the button beneath his skin. He felt the pulse in his own thumb. He saw the green dot on the screen. It was so small. It looked like a grain of sand. He thought about the people on that plane. He thought about the men in the bunker. He thought about the city of Jask. He thought about the first 30 seconds of a war. He entered the final digit of the confirmation string. The system chirped once. It was a high, clear sound. The screen changed. It was no longer yellow. It was bright, solid red. 2:27 in the afternoon. The Jask Peninsula. The Khordad-15 computer system reached its final 0 point. The tactical display in the Iranian bunker stopped flashing. The yellow and green icons were gone. In their place was a single word in bold, luminous Farsi: execute. The system was no longer asking for permission. It was informing the commander that the engagement was ready. The phased array radar was now pulsing at its maximum legal frequency. It was pouring megawatts of energy into the sky. It was a digital searchlight that could not be ignored. Major Arash felt the vibration of the high-power radar transmitter in the soles of his boots. It was a low-frequency hum that seemed to vibrate his very bones. The air in the bunker was hot. It was heavy with the smell of scorched insulation and human sweat. Captain Reza was shouting now. His voice was a raw, jagged sound over the mechanical whine of the cooling fans. The window is now. Major, launch, launch. We are losing the track. Arash did not blink. He felt the plastic of the trigger button beneath his thumb. It was warm. It was smooth. It was the most important object in the world. He knew that 1 millimeter of movement was the only thing standing between a peaceful afternoon and a regional conflagration. He looked at the radar operator. The young man was staring at his screen with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He was not a soldier in that moment. He was a witness to a disaster. 2:27 and 30 seconds in the afternoon, high above the Gulf of Oman, inside the cabin of the American RC-135 Rivet Joint. The world had become a nightmare of sound and light. The radar warning receiver was no longer chirping. It had transitioned into a continuous, high-pitched death knell. It was the sound of a missile system that had achieved a final, terminal lock. Captain Miller shouted into his oxygen mask. Launch indication. I have a launch indication. Brake left. Brake left. Deploying chaff. The pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, threw the massive, 4-engine aircraft into a desperate, plunging turn. The airframe groaned. Henderson saw the Iranian coastline through the side window. It looked like a wall of white heat under the desert sun. He keyed his radio. His voice was strained by the force of the turn. Viper 1-1, Kingpin, we are being engaged. Neutralize the threat. Neutralize the threat. 2:28 in the afternoon. In the cockpit of the lead F-35, the pilot felt his heart hammer against his ribs. His helmet-mounted display was a chaotic map of glowing red symbols. The red diamond was perfectly centered on his visor. It was the Khordad-15 battery. His sensors showed a massive thermal spike from the Iranian site. The cooling gas was venting. The missiles were priming. To his computer, the launch had already begun. Viper 1-1 Magnum. The pilot transmitted. His finger was a fraction of a second from releasing a high-speed anti-radiation missile. He was the sword of Damocles hanging over the Jask Peninsula. He was ready to erase the bunker from the face of the earth. He was a professional. He was focused. He was waiting for the final confirmation of the Syed 3 leaving its canister. Inside the bunker, Major Arash looked at the digital clock. He looked at the execute prompt. He looked at the face of his executive officer. He felt the weight of history. He felt the lives of every person in that room. He felt the lives of the crew on the American plane. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. He felt the mechanical resistance of the button. He pushed his thumb down with every ounce of strength he possessed. The click of the switch was the loudest sound in the history of the bunker. 2:28 and 5 seconds in the afternoon. Inside the Khordad-15 bunker, the click of the button did not trigger a launch. There was no roar of solid fuel rocket motors. There was no vibration of a missile leaving its canister. Instead, there was a sudden and absolute silence. Every screen in the bunker flickered once and then turned a dull, lifeless gray. The high-pitched whine of the radar transmitter vanished. The cooling fans groaned as they lost power. The secondary lights in the room shifted to a dim, emergency amber. Major Arash had not pressed the final execution key. At the last possible millisecond, he had shifted his thumb 2 inches to the left. He had pressed the emergency system purge. It was a hard reset command designed for a catastrophic hardware failure. It did more than just turn off the radar. It wiped the active memory of the fire control computer. It deleted the engagement codes. It rendered the battery useless for at least 10 minutes. Captain Reza stood frozen. His mouth was open.
Forget the monitor.
He looked at the black screens. He looked at the Major. His face shifted from confusion to a mask of pure rage. What have you done? Major, you killed the system. You abandoned the mission. Arash sat back in his chair. He looked at his hands. They were perfectly still. I saved the battery, he said. His voice was cold. The Americans have 2 F-35 fighters 60 miles out. They were waiting for a launch. If a single missile had left the rail, we would be a crater before it reached its target. I am not trading this bunker for a reconnaissance plane. 2:29 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. Inside the RC-135 Rivet Joint. The silence was even more shocking. Captain Miller pulled his headset away from his ears. The screaming alarm had stopped so abruptly that it left a physical ringing in his head. He stared at his waterfall display. The signal from the Jask Peninsula had not just weakened, it had been severed. Flight. Raven, Miller said. His voice was trembling. The emitter is gone. Total signal cessation. I am not seeing any missile uplink. I am not seeing any search radar. Lieutenant Colonel Henderson did not stop the turn. He kept the aircraft diving. Are you sure, Miller? Did they launch? Negative. Flight. No launch indication. No plume detected on infrared. The radar just died. They went dark. High above them, the pilot of Viper 1-1 was already banking. He had been a fraction of a second from firing his own missile. He saw the red diamond on his visor blink once and then disappear. His sensors showed a massive drop in the electronic signature from the coast. The thermal peak he had been tracking was fading fast. Kingpin. Viper 1-1. Target lost, the pilot transmitted. He sounded confused. The emitter has gone off the air. I do not have a lock. Requesting instructions. I am currently over the target area. I have visual on the battery site. There is no smoke. There is no fire. They did not launch. The controller in Qatar sounded equally stunned. Viper. Kingpin. Confirm. No launch. Confirmed. Kingpin. The sky is empty. Raven is clear. Inside the bunker. The silence was broken by the sound of boots on concrete. Captain Reza reached for his sidearm. His hand hovered over the holster. You are a traitor, he whispered. You disobeyed a direct order from the General Staff. You chose the enemy over your own country. Major Arash did not reach for his own weapon. He remained seated. He looked up at the young officer. I chose the survival of this unit. If you want to kill me, do it now. But look at the radar screen first. If I had fired, we would already be dead. Is that what Tehran wanted? A dead battery and a war we cannot win. Reza did not draw his pistol, but he did not step back. The tension in the room was no longer between two nations. It was between two men in a darkened room, surrounded by the smell of cooling electronics and the sound of their own breathing. The clock on the wall continued to tick. 2:30 in the afternoon. The 4 minutes of silence had begun. 2:30 in the afternoon. The Jask Peninsula. The silence inside the Iranian bunker was heavy. It was a physical weight that seemed to press against the ears of every man in the room. Major Arash sat perfectly still in his command chair. His hands were folded in his lap. He did not look at the black screens. He did not look at the glowing emergency lights. He simply stared at the wall. This was the beginning of the 4 minutes that would later be studied by every intelligence agency in the world. Captain Reza stood 2 meters away. His hand was still resting on his holster. He looked at the other men in the room, the radar operator, the communications technician, the missile loaders. They were all watching the Major. They were waiting for a command that was not coming. Reza spoke. His voice was a harsh whisper. Major, you must restart the system. We are blind. If the Americans decide to strike now, we have no defense. We cannot even see them coming. Arash did not move. They will not strike, he said. His voice was calm. They saw the radar die. They know we have disengaged. If they strike a dead battery, they are the ones starting the war. They are professionals. They are waiting, just like we are. 2:31 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. Inside the Combined Air Operations Center in Qatar, the atmosphere was a mix of adrenaline and profound confusion. The senior air defense officer stood at the center of the room. He was staring at the main tactical map. The red diamond over Jask was gone. The RC-135 was now 70 miles offshore. It was moving south at maximum speed. The officer turned to his intelligence chief. What just happened? Why did they drop the track? They had a perfect lock. They had the launch code. Our sensors confirmed the thermal peak. They were seconds from firing. The intelligence chief shook his head. We do not know. Our signals intelligence shows zero electronic activity from the site. No radio traffic. No secondary radar. It is a total blackout. It could be a hardware failure, or it could be a deliberate choice. A choice, the officer repeated. In the middle of a valid engagement. That does not happen. High above the water. The pilot of Viper 11 was circling at 30,000 feet. He looked down at the coastline. He could see the rectangular shapes of the missile canisters through his high-powered optics. They were pointing at the empty sky. The pilot spoke to his wingman. Viper 12. Do you see any movement? Any personnel on the ground? The wingman responded. Negative. It is like everyone just walked away. I am seeing no vehicles, no power signatures, just the battery. It looks like a graveyard. Inside the bunker, 2:32 in the afternoon, the telephone from Sector Command began to ring again. It was a high, piercing sound in the quiet room. It went unanswered. The light on the console flashed. 1, 2, 3, 10 times. Reza stepped toward the desk. Major, answer the phone. It is the colonel. If you do not answer, they will send the military police. They will send the Revolutionary Guard. Arash finally turned his head. He looked at the clock. 2 minutes had passed since he purged the system. Let them come, he said. In 2 minutes, the RC-135 will be outside our maximum range. The crisis will be over. The Americans will return to their base. And we will still have our missiles. That is the only report that matters. Reza looked at the Major. He saw a man who had reached a level of clarity that was terrifying. Arash was not afraid of the court-martial. He was not afraid of the colonel. He had seen the edge of the abyss, and he had stepped back. The Major looked back at the wall. He did not move. He did not speak. He sat in the center of the darkness, waiting for the clock to reach the end of the 4 minutes. 2:33 in the afternoon. The Gulf of Oman. The RC-135 Rivet Joint crossed the 70-mile mark from the Iranian coast. For the crew of Raven 11, this was the invisible line of safety. The kinetic envelope of the Khordad-15 battery was now behind them. The navigator called out the position. His voice was thick with relief. Flight, navigator, we are clear of the threat zone. Turning to heading 180. Proceeding to base, Lieutenant Colonel Henderson exhaled. It was a long, slow breath that seemed to deflate his entire body. He looked at his co-pilot. Maintain maximum continuous power until we are at 100 miles. I do not want any surprises. In the back of the plane, Captain Miller was still staring at the blank waterfall display. He was a professional. He was trained to find patterns in the noise, but there was no pattern here. The Iranian radar had not just malfunctioned, it had been severed with surgical precision. Miller spoke into the intercom. Flight, Raven. I am still seeing 0 emissions. Whatever happened in that bunker? It was total. They are not even trying to reboot. High above, the 2 F-35 fighters received their new orders. The controller in Qatar was calm again. Viper 1-1. Kingpin. Mission is scrubbed. Raven is clear. You are cleared to RTB. Vector 220. Contact tanker Blue Wing. On frequency 355.0. The lead pilot looked down at the Jask Peninsula one last time. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. The shadows of the missile launchers were long and thin. They looked like fingers pointing toward the sea. Viper 1-1 copies. Returning to base. It was a close one today, Kingpin. 2:34 in the afternoon. The Jask bunker. The 4 minutes of silence were over. Major Arash stood up from his chair. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace. He walked to the center of the room. He looked at each of his men in turn. Their faces were pale in the amber emergency light. They were alive, they were unharmed, but they were no longer the same crew that had started the shift. The telephone on the console stopped ringing. The silence that followed was even more ominous than the sound. Major Arash turned to Captain Reza. The American plane is out of range. The fighters have turned back. The crisis is finished. Reza did not lower his hand from his holster. His eyes were narrow. The crisis for the country is finished. The crisis for you is just beginning. You entered the code. You validated the target. And then you sabotaged your own equipment. There is only one name for that. Sabotage. I did not sabotage it, Arash said. I reset it. There is a difference. A difference that the military court will not care about. Reza countered. You had a direct order. You chose to ignore it. Arash stepped closer to the younger man. He did not look at the gun. He looked into Reza's eyes. I did not ignore it. I processed it. I saw the outcome. I saw the F-35s. I saw the missiles. I saw this room burning. I decided that the life of a single reconnaissance crew was not worth the lives of every man in this unit. If that is a crime, I will answer for it. At that moment, the sound of heavy vehicles reached the bunker. It was the low, grinding roar of diesel engines. The dust outside the heavy steel doors began to swirl. The communications technician looked at his monitor. Major, we have arrivals. 3 armored personnel carriers. It is the security detachment from Sector Command. Arash nodded. He reached for his belt. He unbuckled his own sidearm and placed it on the desk. He smoothed the front of his uniform. He looked like a man who was ready for a parade, not an arrest. Open the doors, Arash commanded. The technician hesitated. He looked at Reza. Reza slowly lowered his hand. He stepped back. He was no longer the one in control. The weight of the moment had shifted back to the major. The heavy steel bolts of the bunker door began to grind. The sound of the desert wind rushed in. It was hot. It was dry. It smelled of salt and the coming evening. The 4 minutes were over. The consequences were just beginning. 2:45 in the afternoon. The Jask Peninsula. The heavy steel doors of the bunker retracted with a slow and grinding protest. The desert light flooded the darkened room. It turned the amber emergency glow into a pale and sickly shadow. The dust of the Jask Peninsula swirled in the doorway. It was carried by a wind that felt like a furnace. The security detachment did not enter with a shout. They moved with the cold and mechanical precision of men performing a necessary execution. They were led by a lieutenant colonel from the Revolutionary Guard. He wore a dust-stained uniform and a face that was a mask of professional disapproval. He did not look at the technicians. He did not look at the black radar screens. He looked only at Major Arash. Arash stood at attention. He was perfectly still. He did not wait for the command to surrender his authority. He gestured toward the desk where his sidearm sat next to the encrypted radio. The lieutenant colonel stepped forward. He picked up the pistol and handed it to one of his guards. "Major Arash," the officer said. His voice was a low and resonant growl. "You are under arrest for failure to engage a hostile intruder and the unauthorized disabling of a strategic defense asset. You will be transported to Shiraz for immediate questioning." Arash nodded once. He did not offer a defense. He did not mention the F-35 fighters. He did not mention the lives of his crew. He knew that in the world of military justice, the results often mattered less than the process. He had broken the process. "The system is purged," Arash said. "The missiles are safe. The crew is unharmed. The enemy is gone." The colonel replied, "That is the only fact that will be recorded." They led the major out into the blinding heat of the afternoon. He was placed in the back of an armored personnel carrier. As the vehicle pulled away, Arash looked back at the radar mast. It was a silent and stationary silhouette against the white-blue sky. It was no longer a weapon. It was just a piece of metal in the sand. 3:15 in the afternoon. Over the Arabian Sea. Raven 1-1, leveled off at 25,000 feet. The cabin was filled with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of the air conditioning. The frantic energy of the last hour had been replaced by a heavy and exhausted silence. The technicians in the back were no longer monitoring the Iranian coast. They were busy backing up their data drives and securing their workstations. The pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Henderson, looked at his co-pilot. His hands were finally steady on the controls. "We are 200 miles out. We are in the clear." The co-pilot did not look back. He was staring at the horizon. "We should be dead, sir. That battery had the handshake. They had the code. My sensors showed the thermal spike. They were ready to go." "I know," Henderson said. He contacted Al Udeid Air Base for landing instructions. His voice was professional and clipped, but in the back of his mind, he was thinking about the man on the other side of the water. He was thinking about the 4-minute gap. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The Jask battery. The battery was officially cold. The thermal batteries inside the Sayyad-3 missiles had reached their limit. They were now useless. The high-tech seekers were inert. The missiles would have to be removed from their canisters and sent back to the factory for refurbishment. It was a process that would take weeks. Captain Reza sat in the commander's chair. It was still warm from the man who had occupied it for 10 years. Reza looked at the primary display. The technicians had restored the power. The system was rebooting. A single line of text appeared on the screen. It was the system reset log. It showed the exact second the purge had been initiated. Reza realized then that history would not remember the missiles that were not fired. It would only remember the silence. 3 days later, 8:15 in the morning. Washington, District of Columbia. The Pentagon was already a hive of activity. Inside a windowless briefing room on the second floor, a group of senior intelligence analysts gathered around a mahogany table. They were part of the National Security Agency's Specialized Signals Intelligence Division. On the large screen at the front of the room, a digital reconstruction of the Gulf of Oman was displayed. It showed the flight path of Raven 1-1 and the estimated engagement envelope of the Khordad-15 battery. A senior analyst stood up. He held a laser pointer. "We have finished the forensic reconstruction of the electronic data," he said. His voice was tired. At 2:27 in the afternoon on Tuesday, the Iranian battery near Jask achieved a terminal fire control lock on our aircraft. Every sensor on the Rivet Joint and the supporting F-35 fighters confirmed a pre-launch sequence. He paused and clicked a button. The screen changed to a complex graph of radio frequencies. The thermal batteries on the Sayyad-3 missiles were active. The guidance uplink was established. By every technical metric we have, that aircraft should have been destroyed. The probability of a hit was over 90%. A general sitting at the table leaned forward. And then the 4-minute gap, the analyst replied. At 2:28 and 5 seconds, the Iranian radar did not just stop. It was erased. We detected a massive system reset command. It was not a malfunction. It was a manual override of the entire fire control architecture. For 4 minutes, the battery sat in total electronic silence. They did not even attempt to reboot their secondary systems. The general looked at the map. Why? Was it a technical failure? No, sir, the analyst said. Our human intelligence sources in the region suggest a different story. The battery commander was a major named Arash. He had been given a valid, authenticated order to fire. He entered the codes. He prepared the missiles, but he did not pull the trigger. He chose to crash his own system, rather than start an engagement that he knew would end with the destruction of his unit. The room was silent. The analysts looked at the data. They saw the cold logic of the machines and the unpredictable choice of a human being. 3 days later, 2:30 in the afternoon, Tehran, Iran. Inside a military prison on the outskirts of the city, Major Arash sat on a thin mattress in a concrete cell. The walls were gray. The air was still. He had been questioned for 72 hours. He had been asked the same questions 1,000 times. Why did you not fire? Who told you to stop? Are you a spy? Arash did not have a lawyer. He did not have a phone. He only had his memories. He thought about the sound of the desert wind. The door to the cell opened. A high-ranking officer entered. He was not a guard. He was a general from the regular army. He stood in the center of the room and looked at the prisoner. The Revolutionary Guard wants your head, the general said. His voice was low. They say you are a coward. They say you are a traitor who allowed an enemy plane to escape our territory. Arash looked up. The plane was in international water, General. If I had fired, the Americans would have destroyed the Port of Jask. They would have destroyed the battery. I saved the lives of my men. The general walked to the small, barred window. He looked out at the city. There are some people in the general staff who agree with you. They see the logic. They saw the F-35 fighters on the satellite feed. They know we were being baited. But logic is a dangerous thing in a revolution. He turned back to Arash. You will not be executed, but you will never wear a uniform again. You will be erased from the records. The battery at Jask will be described as having a technical malfunction. The 4 minutes of silence will be officially forgotten. I did not do it for the records, Arash said. The general nodded. He turned to leave. You are a lucky man, Arash, or a very brave one. History is made by the people who fire, but sometimes it is preserved by the people who do not. The door slammed shut. The silence returned. It was the same silence that had saved the world 3 days before. 6 months later, 10:30 in the morning, the National War College, Washington, District of Columbia. A lecture hall filled with military officers and intelligence analysts sat in absolute silence. On the primary screen was a single, high-resolution satellite image. It showed a barren patch of sand on the Jask Peninsula. The rectangular scars of the missile canisters were still visible in the earth, but the equipment was gone. The speaker at the lectern was a senior strategist. She was a woman who had spent 30 years studying the mechanics of escalation. The speaker began. What you are looking at is the site of the Jask incident, or what we now call the 4-minute gap, on that Tuesday afternoon in the Gulf of Oman. Every automated system on both sides of the water performed with perfect mechanical efficiency. The Iranian radar found the target. The American electronic warfare suites detected the lock. The F-35 fighters armed their weapons. The logic of the machines was flawless. By every tactical metric, a war should have started at exactly 2:28 in the afternoon. She paused. She looked at the faces of the young officers in the room. But the war did not start. It did not start because of a variable that we often try to remove from our tactical equations: the human in the loop. Major Arash did something that no algorithm would ever do. He deliberately sabotaged his own tactical advantage to preserve a strategic peace. He recognized that the tactical win of killing a reconnaissance plane was a strategic death sentence for his nation. He chose 4 minutes of silence over a lifetime of conflict. The analysts took notes. They discussed the implications for the future of autonomous weapon systems. They realized that if an artificial intelligence had been in command of that battery, it would have fired. It would have followed the logic of the code and the orders from Tehran. It would have fulfilled the mission. But it would not have seen the F-35 fighters. It would not have understood the consequences of the first strike. It would not have felt the weight of the lives in the bunker, 7,000 miles away. In a small village on the coast of the Caspian Sea, a man sat on a weathered wooden bench. He was dressed in civilian clothes, a simple wool sweater and dark trousers. He was watching the fishing boats return to the shore as the sun began to set. He was no longer a major. He was no longer a commander of a strategic asset. He was a man who spent his days walking along the water and reading history. Sometimes, people in the village asked him about his past. He told them he had been a technician for the government. He told them he worked with electronics. He never mentioned the Jask Peninsula. He never mentioned the Syed 3 missiles. He never mentioned the 4 minutes that had redefined his existence. To the world, he was a ghost. To himself, he was a man who had finally found peace. The world continued to turn. The RC-135 Rivet Joint was still flying its intelligence tracks over the Gulf. The F-35s were still patrolling the skies in predatory orbits. The tension between the nations remained a constant, low-frequency hum. But there was a new awareness on both sides. A recognition that the red line was not just a geographic boundary on a map, it was a psychological one. Strategic analysts would later refer to the Jask incident as the ultimate exercise in military restraint. It became a mandatory case study in every war college, from Annapolis to Moscow. It taught a new generation of officers that the greatest weapon in their arsenal was not the missile or the phased array radar. It was the ability to recognize when the machine was wrong. Modern warfare is often defined by its speed, by the fractions of a second it takes for a computer to process a kill. But on that Tuesday, the world was saved by the slowest 4 minutes in history. It was saved by a man who looked at the most powerful weapons ever built and chose to do nothing. The afternoon air was still. The fishing boats reached the dock. The 4 minutes of silence had become a permanent part of the history of the world. Even if the world would never know his name,